a Georgia Master Naturalist and Sustainable Landscape Designer. She loves to learn and is currently a student in the Certificate in Native Plants program in the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, which is located in Athens. She also volunteers with the Road to Bee Sustainable Agriculture Educational Farm in Beaufort. She's known for her positive, inclusive, and encouraging energy, as well as for being willing to talk about almost anything to do with nature or books. And she is possibly the only person you'll meet who will start a conversation by saying, "Hey, do you want to see a bee?" Welcome, Denise Wilson.
Thank you, Melanie, and everybody here in Coweta County, Master Gardeners. I think we're getting a little feedback. Can everybody hear me okay? It's starting to rain pretty loud. So, can you hear me in the back? Yeah? Great. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. This is an amazing group of gardeners. I just have to say thank you so much for giving me your time, and maybe it'll stop raining by the time we're done tonight. So before we dive in, I do want to introduce myself real quick. I am an avid gardener. I am an invertebrate conservationist and, as Melanie said, a Georgia Master Naturalist, but my background is not actually in entomology. I went to school for music, and I used to work as a clarinetist. So let me tell you how I got here. Okay. Real quick, my son started college this week, but when he was a little guy, in front of our house, we had these huge old-fashioned azaleas with the large, hot pink, trumpet-shaped flowers. You know what I'm talking about? And he was about the same height as those bushes, and we used to spend so much time outside. One day he noticed they were literally buzzing with bumblebees. And he was desperate to know what would it be like if one crawled on his hand. So he was terrified, okay, at first, but curiosity won out, and we discovered that bumblebees are friendly, and you can actually pet them if you're gentle, and they don't mind. And when they're done being petted, they just raise a leg up, and then they go on about their day. So obviously, we fell in love, right? And just like with gardening, you know how it is, one thing leads to another. So I began taking classes and trainings, and I began to volunteer. And eventually I became an ambassador for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And now I get to come and talk to people about bugs. Yay! So I do have a lot of information to share with you tonight about these native pollinators in Georgia, how they live, what threats they face, and 4 ways that you can help by providing food, protecting their habitat, avoiding pesticides, and spreading the word. But don't worry about trying to remember everything, because you can just, like my son, let it spark your curiosity. And I have tons of great resources. I saw a number of you coming up beforehand and looking at them, but please come up after if you didn't get a chance before. These are all free to take home, and we have, these are just some of the ones that I think are going to give you more details to help you with some of the topics from tonight. We have tons more on the website, so please do explore. It's amazing. So not everyone has heard yet about the Xerces Society, so let me just tell you a little bit about us and what we do. The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation is an international nonprofit that protects the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats, protecting the life that sustains us. It's named for the Xerces blue butterfly, which you can see a picture of here. It was last seen in the wild in the 1940s, and it was the first butterfly in the US known to go extinct due to the actions of humans. We are a science-based organization. We approach conservation through education and outreach, habitat restoration, research, and advocacy. And we also engage community scientists and volunteers, which means any and everyone, to help gather data and spread the word about conservation. If you're interested in citizen science programs, we do have a number. You can check those out. I have some information here, and you can also find it on the website. We don't work alone. We're fortunate, so fortunate to work with researchers around the world, keeping us up to date. We work with government entities from local to national levels, and we have many farmer and producer partners who help us experiment and implement restoration techniques on working lands. We receive funding from private foundations as well as companies that share our conservation goals, and we have many volunteers. And of course, we are donor supported. You can definitely find information on making a donation or becoming a member on our website. So now let's dive into why pollinators are important and why we work to save them. There is a term that you hear a lot when talking about pollinators and other organisms, and that is ecosystem services. Basically, that refers to their natural behaviors that we find beneficial. It's a human-centric way of looking at things, okay? But when these creatures are just living their life and we benefit because we're part of the natural world and all life depends on these relationships. So it's good to learn about them because not only do they affect our lives, but we affect theirs. One hugely important ecosystem service that we depend on is pollination. Now, most of you are master gardeners, so I'm not going to give you a pollination lesson, but we will just say pollination is how plants reproduce. It's the transfer of pollen grains from the flower's stamen to the flower's pistil. Is this reverb? Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, we'll give you a different one.
Okay. Can we turn this one off?
Let's turn that one off.
Okay.
You just have to hold it.
It's okay. I can manage that.
You okay
Is
with
it on?
that? Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, much
Okay.
nicer.
That's much better. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Phew. Okay, so for pollination, flowers rely on wind, water, insects, birds, mammals, like bats. Different plants have different types of flowers and make different kinds of pollen. Some pollen is lightweight and gets transferred by wind, but other kinds of pollen are heavy or they're in flowers that just aren't accessible to wind, which is the case for about 85% of flowering plants worldwide. These plants require help from a pollinator to move their pollen. And in this picture, if you're curious, this is a butterfly. A lot of people think it's a moth, but it's a butterfly. It's called an obscure skipper. So to promote conservation and get folks on board, it is helpful to have some economic data. So here we are. It is estimated that about 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food and drink that we consume is the direct result of pollinator work, producing more than $30 billion in economic advantage in North America every year. So here's a picture of a grocery store produce section. A few years ago, Whole Foods Market wanted to show customers what would happen if we did not have pollinators. So they got together with Xerces and this is the result. They had to remove 52% of produce items normally sold at their store for a total of 237 foods, including apples, tomatoes, squash, avocados, eggplant, and many, many others that rely on pollinators. This is amazing. The next year, they looked at the dairy section. Now, dairy is affected because what cows eat, especially alfalfa, is not wind pollinated, but it requires pollination by leafcutter bees and honeybees. Here's the dairy aisle without pollinators, and if you could zoom in, you would see that what's there is in fact the non-dairy items, like plant-based yogurt and butter alternatives. So no actual dairy. And of course, there's lots of other types of food in other departments that I would really be upset if we didn't have pollinators, like coffee, tea, sugar, chocolate. Yeah, insects matter, right? Pollinators are at the center of many complex food webs. Pollination services enable the fruits and seeds that many animals, not just humans, rely on. I forgot to start that thing. There we go. And sometimes the pollinators themselves are the food. Roughly 96% of terrestrial birds in North America feed their babies insects or other arthropods. Baby birds can't eat seeds. Just like baby humans need mushy food, so do baby birds. Some of you may already be familiar with an example from research by author Doug Tallamy, which is the Carolina chickadee. The adults will eat lots of seeds, and you probably get them in your yard, eating from feeders or echinacea. If you let it go to seed, they love that. But for baby food, they need as many as 10,000 soft, mushy caterpillars to raise a single brood of baby chickadees. And these caterpillars, in turn, would not exist without pollination services, making possible the reproduction of their baby food, which we call host plants. And of course, birds are not the only ones eating insects. Many animals rely on them for protein in their diets. Bears, for example, when they raid a beehive, they're not only enjoying the sugar rush of the honey, they're really seeking the protein from all those bee larvae, like an all-you-can-eat buffet that includes dessert. And then there's this guy, which we wouldn't have without animals like the squash bee and the bumblebee. Yeah, so in addition to playing a crucial role in the food web, pollinators bring us joy and beautiful flowers and fond memories of picking berries and making pies and carving pumpkins. So now we're invested in pollinators, right? Let me introduce you to some of them so you can learn about how they live and what they need from us. Now, many animals are pollinators, including birds and bats, but Xerces is all about invertebrates, so that's my specialty. This picture shows a beautiful little pollinator. It is a type of North American sweat bee. Among insects, there are many different kinds that act as pollinators: beetles, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, mosquitoes, and bees. We don't have time to talk about all of them, so tonight we're going to focus on bees. Bees are the most important group of pollinators. Most insects, such as butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, and beetles, are attracted to flowers because they're going for the nectar. Adult bees do drink nectar, but they are out there deliberately gathering protein-rich pollen to take back and feed their young. With the exception of just a few species of wasp, bees are the only insects that do this. The other nectaring insects do transfer some pollen, but they are naturally not going to come into contact with pollen or anthers of flowers as much as bees do. Another thing that makes bees great pollinators is that they exhibit a behavior called flower constancy. This means that when a bee goes out on a foraging trip, she is going to focus on one particular plant species, and she may visit hundreds of flowers of that one type, which, if you're a plant, is great for reproduction. Worldwide, there are an estimated 20,000 species of bee, with approximately 3,600 native to North America north of Mexico. In Georgia, we have about 540 species of different bee. And in your garden, if conditions are right, there could be 20 to 30 species. I think that's pretty cool. About 70% of these native bees are ground nesting, and the other 30% are cavity nesting. This is important to know when you're creating and maintaining a bee-friendly landscape, and we have lots more on this coming up. So what makes a bee a bee? Often when you think about a bee, you're going to think of a honeybee, right? And if you draw a bee, you're probably going to draw a big, round bumblebee. You're not alone. But what really makes a bee is the fact that they are gathering and moving pollen. Now, how do they do this? Female honeybees and bumblebees carry pollen on their legs in a pollen basket. They gather the pollen, they moisten it with their tongue, and they stick it on their rear leg in a concave corbicula. It's called a corbicula is the scientific term. And you see the bumblebee on the left is modeling a beautiful corbicula full of pollen. Now, if you're carrying your pollen in a pollen basket, you're going to get a lot back to your nest. And the pollen that you're moving around flowers is what sticks to your body as you crawl around. But most wild bees don't have this kind of structure. Most wild bees, the other nearly 20,000 species of bee in the world, or over 540 in Georgia, have a pollen brush, which you can see on the right. A pollen brush is a mass of hairs with branches like teeny weeny ferns. They have a static charge, so grains of pollen are attracted and stick to them dry. This is important because it makes pollination very easy. Sweat bees, longhorn bees, and mining bees have pollen brushes on their legs, like this picture on the right. But leafcutter bees and mason bees are different. Their pollen brushes are on their abdomen. Incidentally, carrying so much dry pollen on their abdomen is one thing that makes mason bees better pollinators than honeybees. In fact, mason bees are such great pollinators in apple orchards that it would take more than 100 honeybees to match one female mason bee's productivity. Pretty cool, right? Honeybees are not typical bees. They're pretty special. As you know, honeybees are social and they live in large colonies with up to 60 or 80,000 bees in a hive. That is not like any of our native bees. Most of our native bees are solitary and they don't live in a colony at all. Bumblebees and a very few sweat bees are the only native bees that are social and live in a colony. But their colonies are much smaller than honeybees. In fact, bumblebees are only going to have about 50 to 400 individuals in their nest, unlike the many thousands of individuals in a honeybee colony. Also, only honeybees create an excess of honey, which allows the hive to overwinter, so they are perennial. Bumblebees do make honey, but they make just enough to keep their colony going for a few days if the weather gets bad, and their colony does not overwinter. The rest of our native bees are better. The rest of our native bees don't even make honey at all. And by the way, that's actually another reason why mason bees are better at pollinating apples. Think about when apple trees are blooming. It's just a couple of weeks in early spring, and it tends to be kind of chilly and rainy then. And if you are a honeybee and you have a nice cozy hive full of honey, are you going to be motivated to go out and look for food? No. But if you are a mason bee and you don't have any honey to eat, you've got some motivation to get out there and start looking for nectar and gathering pollen for your babies. There are no native honeybees in North America, even though there are escaped colonies in the wild. What we have are European or Western honeybees, and they were brought here by European settlers to produce wax and honey back in the 1700s. Today, they are enormously important for agriculture. They are managed as livestock, or they are kept and loved as pets by hobbyists. And yes, they do face difficulties, including diseases, pests, insecticides, and nutrition. But it's important to recognize that honeybees are not endangered. In fact, there are more honeybees and honeybee colonies in the world today than ever before. So our focus in conservation is on native bees because their populations are in decline, with some species actually on the endangered list, and they definitely need our help. In working to conserve native bees, we do ask beekeepers be mindful that honeybees actually do compete with native bees for resources, and they have been found to transmit pests and diseases to some native bee species. So we just encourage folks to be responsible and make sure that you provide enough resources to support the colonies without depleting the resources in the surrounding area, and make sure you're maintaining colony health. Honeybees and native bees can happily coexist if resources are sufficient. They do benefit from the same types of things, like this European honeybee and this common eastern bumblebee sharing a meal on a native echinacea in a pesticide-free environment. Our yard. Did it go? Native bees are mostly solitary. They're gentle, and they're very unlikely to sting. Why? Well, solitary native bees are not protecting a nest or a stash of honey, so they don't typically sting unless they're provoked, and it takes a lot to provoke them, like firm pressure on their body, for example, where they feel threatened. The only bees likely to sting are social bees, such as honeybees and bumblebees, who will sting to protect their nest. And of those, only females can sting. Now, because it's important to know who is in your environment, I want to show you some of the amazing diversity of native bees, and this will also help you understand how they live and what they need. Here we have a picture that shows the largest and the smallest species of bee in North America. The largest one is commonly known as valley carpenter bee, and it can be the size of my thumb, and the smallest is tinier than the big one's eye. Now, neither of these live here in Georgia, but still they're pretty cool. Look at this beautiful bee. Bees are not just yellow and black. They come in a full range of colors, from dull black to bright metallic green or even blue. They may have markings in red, orange, white, black, brown, and yellow. This gorgeous bee here is a metallic green sweat bee, and you can actually see them here in Georgia in your own garden from late May through September if you're very observant, because they are quite small. Some bees don't even look like bees. They may not be very fuzzy, like this tiny little bitty cuckoo bee. And this coin in the picture is a dime, just to give you an idea of size. Now let's look at some native bees' pollen brushes. Remember, honeybees and bumblebees have a pollen basket, which is a bare patch on their leg into which they pack a lump of pollen moistened with nectar, but that's only 2 types of bee out of hundreds of species here in Georgia. Most of our bees are going to have a pollen brush with bristles that carry dry pollen using static electricity. Here's a picture of a longhorned bee with a beautifully obvious brush on her rear leg. Leafcutter bees and other bigmouth bees have the pollen brush on the underside of their abdomen, but this one we have a picture of because she is called a fuzzy-legged leafcutter bee, and she also carries pollen on her front legs. Here, blue orchard bee on the left has the pollen brush on the underside of the abdomen, and the big cutie pie on the right is a common eastern bumblebee. And that is its name, by the way. It's not just common, it's the common eastern bumblebee. And she's showing off a nice corbicula with lots of good pollen stuck on there. Here's a picture of a tropical bee, and we use this one to just show their eyes. They have 5 eyes. The 2 large eyes are the ones that they can see color with, and the 3 ones on the top of her head, they're actually really huge on this bee because it's a nighttime active bee, so those are the ones that they use to see light and dark. Most of them you're not even going to see those 3 eyes on the top of their head. It's interesting to know how bees see things like flowers, especially when we're learning what flowers they prefer, because they don't like just every flower. Luckily for us, we don't have to remember all that because researchers have observed native bees on plants, and we have a great list that you can take home with you to help you know what to plant to feed bees if you're interested. Now, different species of bees have tongues of different lengths. You might not have thought much about a bee tongue, but here's your chance. You can see the long tongue of this bumblebee, allowing her to reach nectar deep inside flowers. In contrast, bees with short tongues can only reach nectar of shallow flowers. Now remember, adult bees are looking for nectar for themselves, and they are collecting pollen for their babies. Bees are like superheroes. Superheroes each have their own special power, and most bees have their own special plants that they have evolved along with that they use for nectar or pollen. In fact, many bees are what we call specialist bees because they really only visit that one type of plant. Squash bees and blueberry bees are 2 obvious examples. Now, before we move on, I do want to clarify something. People will often say I got stung by a bee or bees ruined my picnic, when in fact it's not a bee, but a wasp. This creature, having a wee nibble of lunch meat, is not a bee. She is a type of wasp called a yellow jacket. That's right, we all know those. Wasps are important because they eat pests in your garden. They are carnivores. Some wasps, like yellow jackets, can be aggressive, but try to remember that most wasps are not aggressive. Just like there are many solitary bee species, there are also many solitary wasp species, and many of them can't even sting you because they just aren't strong enough, and most of them just don't care enough to try. All of them are a vital part of the ecosystem and the food web, and they just want to live their best life in peace. Now, we are about to get into the natural history of bees, which means their life cycle, where they live, and how they create their nest. Native bees have complex life cycles with specific habitat needs that make them especially vulnerable to changes in their environment, which is your yard. Even if you're not very sciencey or technical, please stick with me because this is going to help you know what these creatures need if they're going to survive and thrive. Now, this gorgeous bee here, this is called a mining bee, and we have these in Georgia, and I am just in love with her silver fur. So let's start out with a solitary bee life cycle, because more than 90% of our native bees are solitary, and their life cycle might surprise you. This is an example of a typical solitary bee life cycle. This one is a ground nesting bee, but others are cavity nesting and might use stems or tubes or other types of holes for their nest. Now, all bees, like butterflies, go through metamorphosis. But unlike butterflies, you're not going to see bees when they're in their larval stage. You will only see the adult bees because they spend most of their life in the nest where the egg was laid. Most of these bees are only going to live for about 1 year. The adult stage, which is the only time you see them, typically is only about 3 or 4 weeks. That's it. This is all the time they have to not only perform their pollination services that we and other animals and plants appreciate, but also this is all the time they have to create their nests and provision them for their offspring, even though they will never see their babies. Up until they emerge as adults, solitary bees typically remain in the nest for about 11 months, growing through egg, larva, and pupa stages. The longest stage is the pupal stage, which can last around 8 or 9 months, and this is when the bee goes dormant and overwinters before completing metamorphosis and emerging as an adult. After emerging, the female bee will mate once and then find a place or places to make her nest and lay her eggs. Now, female bees do take a little bit longer to develop than males, so the bee will lay female eggs first and male eggs last. That way they are emerging around the same time. And within the nest are 1 to 10 cells, depending on species. A cell, you can think of it like a room, and each egg gets its own cell so that each baby bee has its own room. Each cell will get food, which is called bee bread. And you can see that in the bottom picture. It's kind of an orange round thing. It's made by mixing pollen and nectar into a loaf. Then the bee will lay 1 egg in the cell, usually on the loaf, and seal the cell. And when she has completed and sealed all the cells in her nest, she will cap the nest entrance and leave. A female solitary bee may lay up to 20 or 30 eggs in her life. Where is this? Okay. Before we look at the bumblebee life cycle, I want to show you a picture of what an actual nest looks like, because I think it's really interesting and probably quite different from what you might expect. This nest was dug up by researchers, and as you can see, the bees are not harmed at all here. They're crawling around. The cells are made of waxy material. They're round. They look bubbly, don't they? Some of these cells are capped and others are open. The largest bee is the queen, as you might expect, and the others are her daughters. Now remember, a bumblebee colony is only around for 1 season. The males are not going to hatch until the end of the season, which is also when the next queens will hatch. I just thought it was a really cool picture because it's so different. Most people are expecting a beehive to look like a honeybee hive, and it's nothing like it, is it? Okay, so let's talk about the bumblebee life cycle. They differ from solitary bees because they're social when they have many individuals in one nest and they're all working to provide for the next generation. But unlike honeybees, which exist in a perennial colony, bumblebees live in what we call an annual colony. It only lasts for 1 year. It's formed in the spring by a single solitary queen. In the spring, she comes out from her winter burrow and she finds a good place for her nest. She creates the first few brood cells from wax, and then she'll provision them with pollen and nectar, and she'll lay eggs. For the first 4 or 5 weeks, the queen does all the work, all by herself, taking care of the nest until the first eggs that she has laid complete metamorphosis and emerge as adult female bees. These bees then become workers, and they take over some of the jobs. They forage, they help the queen tend to the growing number of brood cells, and then depending on their role in the nest, they may live for 1 or 2 months, by which time there will be more workers to replace them. The queen continues to lay eggs throughout summer, and the colony continues to grow. At the end of summer, new queens and drones, those are the males, they will emerge and mate. And the rest of the colony, including the original queen, reaches the end of their life cycle. The newly mated queens are the only ones that overwinter. They don't spend the winter in the nest where they were born. They will instead go and find a protected place, like under some leaf litter or at the base of some clumping grass, and they burrow down just a little ways into the soil. And because bumblebees have an annual life cycle and generally only are going to occupy their nest site for 1 year, If they do move into the same nest a second year, it's going to happen only by chance. So because of this, if you happen to find a bumblebee nest next to your home, first of all, I'm jealous because that's really cool. But second of all, we do encourage you to try to make space for them during the season rather than attempting to move them or exterminating them. You can protect their nest so you don't accidentally step on it or get stung. You can put like an upside down laundry basket with some bricks on top over it, or you could put a milk crate if you have one on top of it upside down, and that way nobody accidentally steps on it and the bees are safe too and they don't try to sting anybody. If it's near your doorway or a pathway, you can take like a lid from a large plastic bin and put it as a wall to sort of direct their flight patterns away from your living space if you need to. But they're only going to be there for a few months at most, so we encourage you to try to just enjoy having them as neighbors. And now that you understand the life cycle of a typical bumblebee colony, you've taken the first step in understanding their unique habitat needs. Now, remember, about 70% of native bee species are ground nesting. This photo is showing you in the middle an aggregation of nests. That's basically a fancy word for neighborhood, with each bee having her own nest. To make nests like this, some species need loose grassy areas, not dense turf. Others are going to look for bare exposed ground, like a sandy creek side in the woods or something like that. They do prefer sandy to loamy soils, but some will nest in clay. Even small bare patches in your grass or between rocks will work. The area is more exciting if there's key native plants for food. You can look for these like on south-facing slopes where they get warmed by the morning sun. If you find them, just leave them undisturbed. Try not to walk on them or make changes for just a few weeks while the adults are active. In Georgia, if you see these little mounds that look a lot like ant mounds, but they're not because the granules are larger and there's a whole bunch of them all around, there's no ants, those are mining bee nests. Those cute little things like that silver-furred one at the beginning of this section. You can see the adults in spring. They are pretty small, and you will probably only notice them if you stay still for a while and watch the area where you see all these little mounds. If you're fortunate enough to have an aggregation of mining bees in your yard, you can try to leave that area unmowed for a month or two until you don't see the adult bees present any longer. Once they're gone, there's no activity. Remember, the eggs are underground and pretty well protected, so as long as you're not digging, you're not messing them up. The drawings on the right there are kind of a representation of what you might see if you could see what the nest looked like underground. Untidy areas. I hope you don't mind an untidy area in your yard. Bumblebees need a cavity in which to build their nest. The queens are opportunists. They're looking for any suitably sized cavity. Now, sometimes this is above ground, like a hollow tree, or an abandoned bird nest, or a rock wall, or under a little bit of grass, but mostly they want to be underground. And an abandoned chipmunk burrow is a particular favorite because it's warm and dry and already lined with fur. For new overwintering queens, remember they aren't going to stay in that nest, but rather they're going to go out and find a cozy little place to burrow, so like under some leaf litter or at the base of some clumping grass, and they just need a little place where they can find access to the soil to keep warm and hibernate over the winter months. The remaining 30% of our native bees are nesting as solitary individuals, most of whom are looking to make their nests in pre-existing tunnels, because remember, they don't have a whole lot of time, so they don't want to be carving, most of them. Usually wood, such as hollow stems, or abandoned beetle holes found in dead trees or stumps. Some are going to find crevices in the walls of buildings or between rocks and a rock wall. Some of them are not at all choosy, and they'll nest in hollow patio furniture and garden hoses. Ask me how I know. Yeah. But again, you don't need to worry because these bees only have a 1-year life cycle. They don't make honey, they don't make a mess, and they're not interested in you, and they're going to be gone after the new adults emerge the next year. So just take a quick look at the top right of the screen, and what you see there is a cutaway view of the nest of a tunnel nesting bee. You're not going to see this in your yard, so that's why I like to have a picture of it. You can just know it's in there. This one is in a dry, hollow plant stem. And you can see how each baby in the larval stage here has its own room or cell. And can you see the two that are closest to me? You can actually see the orange bee bread. It's very similar to how all solitary bees are making their nests. The difference, of course, being that some are in other kinds of tunnels or in the ground. Now remember the pictures of ground nesting bee nests with cells for their offspring. Making a home in the ground means you need a way to keep out water and protect your babies from other menaces like fungus and pests. So if you make your home in a tube like a stem, you need a way to partition it into cells or rooms for each of your offspring. Different bee species are going to require different materials for this purpose. Some, like this hard-working leafcutter bee, they use carefully cut circles and ovals of leaf. Some use flower petals. Mason bees use mud. Other bees use fine pebbles like sand or tree resin, and others, like carpenter bees, use sawdust to make walls between cells. A potential nest site is most attractive with nearby damp ground or mud puddles, and that gives you an added benefit because butterflies will drink from them because they like the minerals, as well as a variety of native plants near the nest site. Native redbud trees are an especial favorite of leafcutter bees like this little mama here. And if you see perfectly cut little circles or ovals in your redbud trees' leaves, don't worry. The tree is not harmed at all. And somewhere nearby are some very happy little bees making homes for their babies. Native bees have evolved along with native plants over the millennia. The nutritional composition is just right for them. Adult bees may take nectar from a variety of flowers, or they may be looking for specific types. And for their babies, they're collecting that protein-rich pollen. So for this purpose, most of them are looking for very specific flowers, and these bees we call specialist bees, but some of them are happy with pollen from a variety of native plants. Those are generalists. Recall that bees see differently than we do, and they're mostly looking for flowers that are blue, violet, purple, and yellow or orange. They don't see red. So although some do visit flowers that look red to us, those flowers appear different to the bees. They do see UV light. And it's really, if you want to see how a bee sees, there are two documentaries that I can recommend. One of them is called David Attenborough, Life in Color, and the other is called My Garden of 1,000 Bees. And you can actually see how a bee sees the world. It's amazing. So now we have to talk about threats. Why are native bees in decline? Habitat loss is a key driver of pollinator declines, and it can take several forms. One factor of loss is habitat conversion. For example, development, intensive agriculture, or landscaping that isn't pollinator friendly. Another part is pesticide contamination of areas that could otherwise be pollinator habitat. And a third factor in habitat loss is declines of key plant species that pollinators depend on, like milkweed that monarchs need to reproduce. A lack of host plants is a lack of habitat. Here are two examples of common scenes in urban areas where pollinator habitat is lost. This is a missed opportunity, y'all, because there's certainly a lot that could be done here to provide suitable habitat for pollinators. Pesticide is another big threat. It's an umbrella term, pesticide is. It includes insecticide, fungicide, herbicide, rodenticide, and even antimicrobial products. So basically, anything ending in "cide" is a pesticide. The pesticides that we're most concerned about for pollinators are insecticide, fungicide, and herbicide. These are a major threat. In this picture, you see some sample jars with dead bees in them. Let me tell you what happened. In Portland, Oregon, which is where Xerces is headquartered, there was an incident, ironically, during Pollinator Week in 2013, where some linden trees in a parking lot had an aphid infestation. And they were treated with insecticides according to the label to kill the aphids. Pesticides were absorbed through the sap, and they were distributed by the tree's vascular system to the flowers where the bumblebees were feeding, killing approximately 50,000 bumblebees over a period of 2 weeks. They tested samples of the bees and showed that they had perished from that pesticide. Now, the pesticides were applied legally and according to the label, so no one had done anything incorrectly. Okay? The key takeaway here is the approval process for pesticides does not factor in real-world dangers of these products on pollinators. So this incident underscores the importance of avoiding pesticides since they may be approved for use without knowing how they affect beneficial insects. Now, there is good news. People learned from this, and those pesticides can no longer be used on the linden trees in the city of Portland, and we can learn from it too. When we think about pesticide, we often think about agricultural areas, but they are commonly used in urban areas as well, and in fact, more pesticides are used in home landscapes than agriculture. Remember, in addition to insecticide, herbicide, and fungicides are also pesticide. In our communities, pesticides are most often being used for cosmetic reasons to maintain a certain look, a controlled and manicured aesthetic. So eliminating this cosmetic pesticide use is actually a simple thing to do to make a healthier environment for pollinators and other species, including us and our pets. But it may mean accepting that your landscape doesn't look like it's artificially perfect. Another thing about urban pesticide use is that all the paved surfaces, sidewalks, driveways, streets, they allow pesticides to wash off easily, and they go into the storm drain and straight into the waterways. So limiting urban pesticides is a great step to improve water quality. So yes, we definitely encourage everyone to avoid using pesticide, but we do recognize that sometimes, and in some situations, it may be prudent to apply something judiciously. So we ask you, please read the label carefully, follow the instructions for targeted application rather than broadly spraying. Pesticides are a huge issue. We have webinars specifically about pesticides on the YouTube channel, but especially with the proliferation of mosquito spraying. Now, I don't know about y'all, but where I live, there are tons of ads for mosquito spraying, and some of them can be misleading. I want to be sure you know there is no such thing as an insecticide that is safe for pollinators. If it harms one, it harms them all. And yes, okay, organic pesticide is still a pesticide. So what can we do? Taking action to conserve pollinators has large-scale benefit of helping our landscape become more resilient, our food supply more stable, and supporting all the animals and people that depend on them. What do bees need? They need support for their entire life cycle. They need secure nest sites, they need flowers for foraging, and they need a pesticide-free environment. Now, I know this is probably really hard to see in detail, but this is an illustration of an urban environment that supports the entire life cycle of bees. It looks like a treasure map if you're a bee. It shows foraging paths of both a ground nesting bee and a cavity nesting bee, and you might not be able to see it, but I'll walk you through the kinds of things this urban area provides for their habitat. Now, not everything they need is in one yard, but that is okay because bees don't care about whose yard is whose or whether they're foraging on a roadway or in a park. The thing to notice here is that the bees' needs are being met within a small area, basically a one city block, because that is the extent of their range. Our native bees don't fly nearly as far as honeybees, who can fly several miles to forage. So in this one city block, our native bees can find things like a fruit tree here, some flowering shrubs there, some different flowers in other places, and of course, some good ground or cavities to nest in. And most of these bees are going to be completely unnoticed by most of the people in this area. So zooming in, what does this look like and what can we do? We have looked at what native bees need in their natural environment, how they have evolved to live in the wild. However, only about 5% of the entire United States is protected as wilderness, and that is continuing to get even smaller. So we need to not only work to preserve wild spaces, but we really need to see what we can do to create natural habitats and develop spaces to make room for our wild neighbors, including pollinators, because it's not only large efforts that count, small efforts by many people all add up. If half of all privately owned lawn in the U.S. were converted to diverse landscape that supports pollinators and other wildlife, that would be 20 million acres of habitat. That's amazing. But more than lawn space counts, patios and balconies also count because you can have potted plants that support bees there too. In these pictures, we see some examples of habitats in urban and suburban areas. We've got roadsides, school parks, Public parks, power line passes are a great opportunity. Community gardens and individual gardens, including potted plants on balconies and patios. Now, the best habitats are natural habitats. Native bees are looking for bare ground, hollow tunnels, and things like dead trees. If these features already exist in your landscape, keep them if you can, but if they don't, you could plant an old log or stack some stones and create some mulch-free zones where the ground is accessible. A landscape doesn't have to be tidy or look like a golf course in all the places. You can have some little areas that are untidy. Now, these photos, these are taken from a perspective that most people are not going to see. Yes, they look wild. But look at the top photo. This shows an office building. The photographer here was standing amid this natural area looking uphill toward the office building, but if you were at the building looking down, you would first notice a very tidy area of maintained grass and other plantings, then a small barrier of edging before the natural area. We call that a cue to care, and it can really help to define a space that you are deliberately maintaining as natural, as opposed to one that is neglected. Now, as you're looking around your property, think like a bee. Remember, 70% of our native bees are ground nesting. They need access to soil, preferably getting some morning sunshine to warm them. But the areas don't need to be large, because apart from bumblebees, these little bees are not making a colony. Here's a picture that shows an area only about 8 or 10 inches wide. It's between a rock wall and a driveway. If you look at the bottom of that rock, you can see there's some holes where a bee is nesting. This is great habitat in a small area. Maybe you have some small areas of habitat already that you don't yet know about, and now you know to keep them safe. Another action you can take is rethink or shrink your lawn. You can plant a bee-friendly lawn. Look at this. This has a little patch in it. Now, I don't know, maybe you might think that's not as great, or you might not used to have thought this was as great as thick turf, but now, knowing what you know, you can see this as beautiful because it's somebody's home. It allows them to have a little place in your ground. You can choose plants that require less mowing, less water and fertilizer, and of course, avoid pesticides. Now, here's something really interesting. In 2021, University of Georgia researchers found that lawns of centipede grass that had never been treated with insecticide, and I'm sure that part is key, could support multiple species of pollinators. They found individuals from 13 different genera of bees nesting in the lawns and 5 different genera collecting pollen from the grass. Centipede grass blooms from August to October. And the last I heard, these researchers are planning more research to develop bee lawn mixes for Georgia, so that's really exciting. But if your site happens to be suitable for centipede grass, that is one type of turf grass that doesn't require a lot of inputs, and it can be mowed. If you can't do centipede grass, you can try a mix of short grasses or wild violets and other wildflowers that can tolerate foot traffic in your specific conditions. Okay. We also encourage you to rethink mulching. A great option that you can try is called green mulch, where you allow native plants to grow in close communities. But you can also provide good bee habitat with other types of mulch if you allow some areas of mulch to be thin and sparse, so bees can still access the soil. Each of the pictures on the top here shows a space maybe about 1 inch square. That's all they need. In the top left, you can see a small sweat bee nest in gravelly soil. In the top middle, you can see a mining bee nest among leaf litter, which makes great mulch, but even so, the bees do need to be able to get to the soil in some places. And in the top right, you can see that little green thing peeking out? That's a sweet little sweat bee, green metallic sweat bee, peeking out from a nest in a tiny bare spot between the lawn and other plants that doesn't have mulch in the way. So you don't have to forego the mulch entirely. You can maintain microhabitats, little bitty areas that offer critical nesting habitat for ground nesting bees. Cavity nest. You can maintain some suitable habitat for cavity nesters. Now, the majority of wood or cavity nesting bees are looking for pre-existing tunnels or cavities in dead trees, logs, brush, or the centers of pithy stemmed shrubs like elderberry, sumac, raspberry. In the picture here, we've got, this is Baptisia with some stems cut. Bumblebees also nest under clump-forming bunch grasses or tall grass, so you can leave those. loosely constructed rock walls, untreated fence posts, and other structures, they may attract additional bees. Use your imagination and see what happens. Now, I do want to talk to you because I'm sure you've heard about save the stems, but this always, people get excited, they want to do it, and then when it comes time, they're like, well, how do I do this? So I want to tell you, first step is make sure you have a variety of plants with pithy stems: goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, echinacea, raspberry, swamp sunflower, yucca filamentosa. If you need more ideas, look at our handout. I do have cards. This is a picture of the cards that I have up here you can take with you if you want. And here's how it works. The flowers that you're enjoying right now in summer of 2025 will not be used this year for nests, but they can become next year's nests in the spring of 2026, where baby bees are going to stay for another whole year before they emerge as adults in 2027. So it's a 2-year process. So you allow some of the flowers to remain after blooming. Now, you don't really need to leave them all. Remember, most native bees are ground nesting. Only 30% of native bees are looking for cavities like this, and only very small ones are able to use most of your stems. So you leave some of the flowers, and these are going to dry, and the seeds can provide food for birds, as well as some visual interest through winter. In spring, the adult bees begin to fly around here as early as late February. So before they come out looking for nests, you're going to cut off the tops of those flower stalks. This way you have open tubes that are attractive to these bees. You can leave about 8 to 24 inches standing. Then you can take those cut tops and you can make bundles to put around for more potential nests, or just put them on the compost pile. Now, once the plant starts to put out new growth, soon after that, the new green stems and flowers are going to obscure those old ones that you're leaving for bee nests. In fall, you begin to allow some more of those new stems to dry out, leaving the flowers through the winter months alongside your original dry cut stems that are possibly housing young bees. And then in the spring, those young bees are going to come out. Your new old stems are going to become the ones that are going to be used for nests. And the ones that were already used, the 2-year-old stems, they're going to start falling over naturally. So you don't really even have to worry about trying to figure out which ones are the old ones. That's the time you can clean them up if you want to, or you can just leave them to decompose. This helps to prevent harms caused by pests and disease, because as nature takes its course, the bees aren't going to reuse those stems. So hope that helps clear it up. For tunnel nesting bees like mason bees and leafcutter bees, you can leave things like dead trees and hardwood logs with bark on, because natural sites are best. But if you don't have enough natural sites, or if you want to be able to observe them up close more easily, you can use an artificial snag like a bee house or a bundle of tubes. These are easy to provide, but do take care that you don't overcrowd your ecosystem. Remember, these bees are gentle. They don't care if you hang out with them. In fact, my son loves to. He has a mason bee house that somebody gave him, and he replaces the tubes every year, and when they start flying, he'll just put his chair out there and let them fly all around. They do not care. They're not going to sting unless you really, really threaten them. So one question is, how deep should the bee houses be? How long should these little tubes be? These moms are smart, and they're going to create decoy cells closest to the entrance. So every tube is going to have decoy cells closest to the entrance. These are going to be empty to deter predators. The next few cells, as you may remember, are going to contain eggs that will become male bees, which leave the cells farthest in, the first eggs that are laid, to become females. So the shorter the tube, the fewer the females. And we want lots of females so that there will be lots of future eggs and baby bees. So because of this, shallow bee houses like the one in the top picture are not really recommended. You want a minimum of 6 inches in depth, ideally. Okay, and do remember, if you're providing a bee house, you're going to need to clean out blocks and replace your tubes every year to prevent the spread of disease. But natural materials like dead trees and logs, they're self-limited because they do begin to decay and they're not going to be reused, so you don't need to worry about cleaning those. And here's an up-close picture to show you, yes, they really do work. These are some mason bee tubes. They have mud at the end, and you can see the little mason bee coming out. Leafcutter bee nests will have leaves at the end. Now here's another thing that you can do starting this fall. You can leave the leaves where they fall to provide soft landings, an excellent winter cover for all kinds of animals, including the vast majority of butterfly and moth species. Did you know they're overwintering in your leaves on the ground? Bumblebee queens, lacebugs, snails, millipedes, beetles, spiders, mites, and all kinds of other stuff. But it doesn't mean that you have to leave the leaves absolutely everywhere, all right? It's fine to leave them scattered over the lawn, but too much is going to smother the grass and other plants. You don't want that. Plus, I mean, if you're a bee, that's not really what you're looking for. You don't want to hang out in the middle of a yard where you might get stepped on, okay? Or the leaves might blow around too much and leave you exposed. They are actually wanting to stay under the shelter of trees and shrubs, which is where leaves are mainly falling. So this is the goal of leaving the leaves. So yes, please do definitely leave the leaves and provide soft landings under the trees and shrubs and good shelter. All kinds of creatures are going to benefit, including the plants. Another action to take is provide food, flowers on native plants. Bees need these food sources from late winter to late fall. They are dormant in winter. So pollinator habitats need a diversity of native plants to provide what's called a succession of bloom throughout the growing season. Now, you already know native is best because you've heard me say it, and I'm sure you've heard it 100 times elsewhere. And these are the plants that our native pollinators have evolved with, and they need the nutrition. But let me tell you, imported plants and cultivars of natives may not be suitable if bees can't access the nectar. Like zinnias with rounded heads of many petals, they can't get in there real well. Or the plant may have been bred to not make pollen, like some types of sunflower. What good is that if you're a bee? Or the color may not be attractive, like some cultivars of echinacea. Because echinacea is a native plant, you might think they're all good. Well, maybe they're not all that great. Or the nutrition may not be there. And the thing that we don't always know what is changing along with the desired traits when plants are bred to have specific features. So it's not necessarily a thing to avoid a nativar, which is a cultivar of a native plant. But if you don't know already that bees can use it, maybe just try one and see what happens before you invest in a whole bunch of nativars, if you can't find the straight species. Now, I don't have time, obviously, to go into much about plants, but some of my very favorites for our area are, I love redbud trees because I absolutely love leafcutter bees, and I love the trees too. Blueberries are great. Echinacea, rattlesnake master is one of my favorites. Tons of pollinators love rattlesnake master. Mountain mint, you can't go wrong. Bee balm and asters. Love, love, love. And finally, but very important, spread the word. Increase awareness. You're learning a whole lot, and the more you know, the more you can share. And sometimes you might start to get questions from friends and neighbors, family, about what you're doing that's different, or why you have so many butterflies and bees in your yard and they don't. You can put up a yard sign. Signs like this one are available in the Xerces gift catalog online, but it can be any sign, including one you make. You can tell people about what you're learning, and we would love for you to make use of our many free resources on the Xerces website and YouTube channel. And of course, I have stuff you can take home here, so please do come browse for something to take home with you to help you remember some of this stuff and learn even more than what I was able to tell you. Thank you so, so much. Okay, we have time for a few questions if anybody wants to ask, or if you would rather come see me after, you can do that too. I see a hand.
Do you give lectures to homeowners associations? Because,
Ooh.
most of us live in homeowners associations, and if you try to do a lot of this stuff, they'll just want you to cut it down.
You are so right. You are so right.
I just had a situation with that.
Oh,
Bad.
yeah.
But,
Well,
I saved the stuff pretty much behind the fence.
yeah.
I said, just leave that to grow like it's wild.
So I do have some tips for you. Okay, so in your front yards, when you live in the question is about homeowners associations, and that's hard. So if you can choose plants that have a tidier habit. So choose things that are 3 feet or shorter. then when they get tall, they start to look leggy, and folks start to feel like, oh, that's messy. You know, I don't like seeing that. So for your front, choose stuff that doesn't grow real tall. Choose just a few colors, like 3 colors max, to go at in one season. You can have different colors in different seasons, but like 3 colors max, so it's not visually overwhelming. Okay, and then provide what we call a cue to care. So if you're going to have, and it depends on how your yard is shaped. Like my yard, I have a hill. So what's at the top of the hill right next to my house, people can't see it as well from the road, so I have a lot more leeway there, even though I do have an HOA. But if you don't, if it's all visible, you can have more variety closer, and then maybe plant some shrubs in between your pollinator garden and the street, so that what people see is uniform and tidy. And so those are just a couple of suggestions for working within an HOA. And yes, I am available for doing presentations, but I can also point you to some online resources that may be possibly a little bit more helpful. Yeah, thanks for the question. Hey.
In terms of like insecticides, is neem oil any safer for pollinators?
So the question is about insecticides and neem oil in particular. So with anything, if you're trying to protect a crop plant, you're just not having any luck or whatever, the thing to remember is if the pollinators are coming into contact, it's going to have the same effect on them that it has on everybody else. That's all I can tell you. Okay. Any other questions?
That's the toughest part is, okay, you don't want to use insecticide, but at
Yeah.
the same time, your plants are looking awful because
Ooh.
someone's eating them. What do you do?
Okay, so rethink that though. Because think like, okay, you know, people brought cookies and they look amazing and they're getting eaten. We like that. If your plants are being eaten, you're doing something right.
No, I don't think my plants are being
Oh.
eaten. And I said they look awful because there's brown spots on them.
Oh.
Not that the plant, I don't mind that if I think it's a caterpillar.
Oh, it's the plant itself has
Yeah, like a fungus.
fungus and spots, yeah. Yeah, that's tricky. So we encourage you to consult with your county extension agent for specific advice. But yeah, there's all kinds of ways. Like I'm out there all the time pulling the Japanese beetles off and throwing them into the bucket of doom, and you know, yeah. So it's very hands-on. It is hands-on, yeah.
Next month, our speakers on beneficial
I'm
insects.
going to be there, trust me.
I'll be looking at it. I think one more.
Okay.
And what's the best time of year to hang one of those bug hotels?
Bug hotel, best time of year to hang one. Okay, so if you want to put that out, mason bees, you're going to probably get mason bees before any other kind, and they are active in February. So if you put it out early February, before you start seeing any bees, you may get some visitors. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. If you haven't gotten any resources, please come help yourself. Turn that off.